Hello, everyone, and welcome to this talk on the aspects. In this video, we are going to go through the aspect of the square. And I want to talk to you guys about how powerful the square is, what it looks like when you see it in the chart, and what it typically signifies, and then how you can actually transmute this energy and shift it and change it. Okay, so within the planetary alignments, they create mathematical degrees to one another. And when you see this symbol with the red lines in a perpendicular motion toward one another, they're creating a 90-degree angle. And any planet that showcases this type of anytime you see this type of alignment, this is what we call a square. Okay, now a square in astrology signifies that the person who embodies the square, or the transit itself that the square is happening, is actually going through a little bit more conflict. Okay, so there are certain aspects that kind of mean ease, and then there are certain aspects that mean conflict. And a square quite often means that there is some sort of conflict. Now, I'd like to share with you what a square can be interpreted as and how I interpret a square. Now, what is happening here is that these energies are similar but are coming from different points of views. Whenever you're seeing a square, you are actually seeing a mode. Whenever you're seeing a square, whenever you're seeing a square, you are actually seeing something that is similar, but it's having a different point of view. Why do I say that? Well, if you look at anytime you see a square, more than likely they're going to share the same modality. So the square will share a similar, they'll either be cardinal, they'll either be fixed, or they'll either be mutable. This is coming from the cross of the modalities. And because every single modality is found in the season, as we discussed in the season lectures, every time a square happens, it's because the same modality is aspecting its twin modality, but in a different season. So let's take, for example, cardinal modalities. Okay, so your cardinal signs are going to be Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. Okay, this means that these zodiac signs are always in a square to one another. They always create these 90-degree angles. And thus, if you have any planets that are in similar degrees but in the same zodiac modality, they're more than likely will square each other. For example, if you have Jupiter in Libra and you have Mercury in Capricorn, this means that these two are going to square off of one another. Okay. And so, what you're also going to find in the squares, that what is also happening is that they can create another aspect. Okay, so a square, so when you're looking at the modalities, they're all similar. Okay, all of the modalities are the same, but when they interact with one another, so when the cardinals interact with one another, which means that they create a mathematical relationship with one another, they're either going to be a square or an opposition. And these are two of the more difficult angles that you find in astrology. Now, you'll find the opposition is coming from the opposite sign. So let's use the cardinals, for example. Libra and Aries are opposite signs. Okay, so they're creating a different mathematical degree than Libra in Cancer and Libra in Capricorn. So any planets that are opposite of one another, they too share the same modality, but they're considered oppositions. Okay, now a square is going to be the square is going to happen from the zodiac sign that shares the same modality but is consecutive to one another. Okay, so it's not across from one another. For example, Libra and Cancer, right? Or Cancer and Aries, right? Those are modalities that are consecutive to one another. And this is where the square is coming from. This is how we create 90 degrees. And I almost like to interpret it in a very odd way as a corner of the circle, right? Because A circle doesn't have corners, but what ends up happening because of these relationships with the planets and the zodiac signs is that there are actual corners, things that you can't see. And the square, very much so, is something that you cannot see because of the concept of it being like a corner. Now, I live in New York City. So in New York City, we have, a lot of pedestrians walking on the street, okay? And you have people who can walk from one corner and a person who can walk from the other corner, and they actually can't see each other because they're actually coming from a different block, right? But once they meet at the tip of the corner, which is the point, the angle, the perpendicular 90-degree angle, then they actually can see each other. So, this is how I like to interpret squares. I interpret them as being around the corner. And the challenge of the square is that you can't see it. You can't understand, like, why is this not working? And that's because of the integration that has to happen. But first, you have to be able to see it. Okay. Now, let's use this as an example so I can help further this concept. Let's go ahead and use the earth modality. Let's go ahead and use the fixed modalities. Let's look at Taurus versus Leo versus Scorpio versus Aquarius. Okay, so when we're looking at the squares, we're looking at the consecutive modalities, the ones coming one after the other. So this would be Taurus with Leo, right? Or Taurus with Aquarius. Okay, now let's say that you have a planet in Taurus and you have a planet in Aquarius. All right, this means that these two planets are similar. How are they similar? I'll give you a second. They're similar because they are fixed, right? But what makes them different? Well, all of the principles that come with that zodiac sign. So the principles of Taurus to Aquarius is quite often that Taurus can't see its value once it disperses out into the networks of social groups. Quite often, this may be where the Taurus part of our nature is insecure because of the square to Aquarius, and Taurus is unable to want to share, right? Because Taurus is I have, and so it can be very possessive. With Aquarius, which is kind of like I know, and we can take this and spread this across the place. So what happens when a Taurus and Aquarius come together, or Taurus and Aquarius energies come together? They're both stubborn, and one wants to hold on and possess its stuff, and the other wants to take that Taurus's possession and do something with it. And so this is where we typically have to learn how to integrate these energies. And so whenever I'm reading for a square in a chart, right, what I do is actually talk about the integration of what is not being seen from these two zodiac signs. You could start with where they are similar, which is their modality, and then you can go ahead and start to move into what is it that makes them different. And when they're able to accept their differences, then the square, the conflict of the square, starts to actually become this beautiful masterpiece of possibility and potential and limitless strength and power. So this is how we can transmute the squares in our chart, by learning how to integrate the corners of the zodiac. So what we're going to do now in this section is go through the natural squares that you find, okay? And so you're going to be comfortable being able to talk about squares after this part of the course. And you'll also be able to handle any sort of planetary square that comes up, and be able to start speaking on how these conflict each other and how they can also learn how to come together. So let's go ahead and start talking about the squares in the zodiac signs. And you're also going to have some assignment prompts that are going to encourage you to also kind of write in your own way after I've given my own personal interpretation, right? For you to go ahead and write your own interpretation. So this is a way to challenge you after every exercise to take what I've said and then put your own twist on it. And this is how you're exercising your astrologer muscle, by hearing the principles and then seeing how you can, it's the same thing, but how would you put it in your words? What would your take be on it? Okay, so let's go ahead and begin. Enjoy this section on talking about the squares in the zodiac signs.